Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is Nashville and youth services. And we're fortunate to have with us two persons to talk about Nashville and youth services. Captain Valerie Meece. Captain Valerie Meece is the director of the Division of Youth Services for the Metropolitan Police Department. And of course with Captain Valerie Meece is Mrs. AVienneau2. Ms. AVienneau2 is the area director for the Nashville YWCA. And let me welcome both of you, Ms. Meece and Ms. AVienneau2, to the show this morning. Ms. Meece, what we'd like to do this morning is to talk about the Metropolitan Police Department and some of the things that you're doing in the area of youth services. But before we get into that conversation, let's have you and Ms. AVienneau2 to give us some information about your background, your education, and in your case, Captain Meece, some of the things that were important in your life in leading you to such an important responsibility as the director of a division with the Metropolitan Police Department. Let's give you an opportunity to give us that kind of information. Then we'll get into some of the problems of Nashville and youth services.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to discuss youth services. I'm a 22-year veteran of the police department, and I joined the department when I was fairly young. I was just barely old enough to be on the department, and I went initially to the patrol division, and I served 7 years there as a patrol officer, and it was I guess you could say it was a pretty enlightening experience for me, because I did not have a real sense of what crime was. I came from a small community and was raised originally in North Dakota, and that's pretty well known as a fairly low crime rate area of the country. So I spent 7 years there, and while I was in patrol, I decided that I needed to start getting an education beyond a high school degree, because all I had done was graduate from high school. So I began going to college. I got some federal assistance to do that, and I worked my way through an associate degree. And in the meantime, I ended up being transferred to the training academy, so I began working there as an instructor, and that was probably the beginning of some of the most significant learning that I really did, because we dealt not only with recruits who enter the police system, but we also dealt with sworn personnel and civilians, and I began to do a lot in the area of teaching and training, and that was real interesting for me. When I completed my associate degree, I went on to Belmont College, and I completed a bachelor's degree, and that took me a little bit longer than the norm, because I was trying to work as I was going to school. And then I went on to Murfreesboro, and I graduated from Murfreesboro with a master's degree in criminal justice. So much of the formal education I've gotten, most of it, as a matter of fact, as it relates to advanced degrees, deals specifically with police work. So I rose through the ranks at the training academy, and I rose to the position of a lieutenant, and then when I was promoted to a captain, I went on to the youth services division, and I became the commander of that division. And that was a real experience for me, because I had no specific knowledge about juvenile crime. And it was a learning experience in that I had to learn from the people that were working really for me and with me to teach me about the responsibilities that I had specifically as it related to juvenile crime. So I've been there about 6 years, and it's a constantly learning process for me, because the issue of juveniles involved in crime is kind of a constantly changing process. But it's been a real good experience, and I've come away from that with a much better understanding, I think, of children and how they behave and how they learn to behave badly and that type of thing. So that's pretty much where I'm at this point.
Very good. And I tell you, we'll have you to share some of that information in reference to youth and crime later on, after Ms. AVienneau2 gives us some information about her background and what led her eventually to the area directorship of the YWCA.
Great. First, I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to be here this morning. I am a native Nashvilleian, and got my education here, but spent numerous years in New York City. I had another career as a professional dancer with the Dance Theater of Harlem, and had the opportunity to tour all over the United States and also Europe, but found myself really wanting to go back and further my education and come back to Nashville and give back to this community. So I came back, went to Vanderbilt University, where I got my bachelor's degree in human development. And it was through that study that I realized I really wanted to focus with youth and see what I could do as far as giving back to youth and building self-esteem. I've worked over 6 years in youth services. 4 of those years have been with the YWCA. As it states, the YWCA, our focus is on women and girls, so I do have a special interest in that area and have been very committed to providing quality services for young girls in this community.
Very good. As a matter of fact, I think that there's a new emphasis in Nashville in terms of helping young females, and we want to talk about that, Ms. AVienneau, with you this morning. Captain Meece, I think you've already indicated that you've got a variety of experiences in the Metropolitan Police Department, and let's have you this morning to draw from those experiences and to talk to our audience about the youth situation that you saw when you first became involved with the Metropolitan Police Department, and the current youth situation in terms of, and I think that when we talk about the current youth situation, we're talking about over the last several days, at least 4 young people being found dead for one reason or the other. Now, how do you go from when you entered into the department and the status of youth activity, youth criminal activity, and et cetera, and what is going on now? Talk to us about that for a while, will you please?
That's an interesting question, because as a patrol officer, it was not at all unusual for me to see juveniles involved in violent offenses. From a police standpoint, the issue of juvenile crime is not a new issue. And you'll talk to many officers who have, over several decades of police service, seen children involved in violent behavior. There was somewhat of a different atmosphere back in the early 70s, and that's really when I kind of arrived on the scene, as it related to how we dealt with juveniles, because a juvenile's record, as it relates to any arrest history, is a confidential document. It is not available to anyone in the community other than a specific criteria of people. So in the 70s, the community would not be aware that juveniles were doing violent things. There was another element to that that was a little bit unusual, and that's that sometimes crime is not reported. And sometimes, if juveniles are involved in crime, there's no way, at least at that point in time, to trace crime back to them because of the confidential nature of juvenile activities in violation of the law. We might not have any information in our system that would link a juvenile back to a particular offense. For example, if a juvenile had committed a murder back in the 70s, and at the scene of that particular crime we found latent prints, fingerprints, there would probably not be fingerprints on file in our identification division that we could compare to those prints. So it's very possible that juveniles were committing crimes. Maybe the crimes were reported, but we did not know that they had been involved. So when the issue began to arise in the mid-'80s and it became much more of a public issue, it was not a new issue for us. It was an ongoing issue that was raising concerns, obviously, but not a new issue. What was a little bit different and what is a little bit different is that there is a very strong drug culture. And we know that particularly as it relates to those crimes that really incense us, there's probably a drug link to those crimes. And we also know that guns are as prevalent as they ever were because we have such a love affair with firearms in this country. And juveniles are able to get firearms, they can get them quickly, and they're using them to a larger degree than they ever did in the past, primarily because of the accessibility of those crimes. So, although there's a significant difference, I guess particularly because of the drugs and the increased homicides, it isn't a new issue. It's an ongoing issue for us that we continue to be concerned about.
Okay, now I think we've got about 25 seconds, before we have our first break today. And we'd like to sort of give you an opportunity after this break to talk about the female side of the situation. I think that quite recently quite a bit of information has been given in terms of the glass ceiling and some of the opportunities and possibilities for females. And I think you can also relate that to some of the things that we've already talked about. And we'll be back with you following this commercial.